second guest for tonight is Simona. Simona has been working in the general field of AI for close to 20 years, most notably in the areas related to the processing of human languages, such as automatic speech recognition, natural language understanding, machine translation, and conversational reasoning. His experience ranges from many years in research, in the development of smart assistant applications, to defining strategy for AI-based offers. She's currently the head of AI strategy with the Wealth Management Division of the National Bank of Canada. Her talk is called AI Transformation, Challenges and Opportunities, and I'm looking forward to see what she will tell us tonight. So Simona, you can take over.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. I've unmuted myself. I don't know whether you can also see me. I'm also sharing my camera.
Yes, we can hear you. And if you share, we'll take over the share of the screen.
All right. Well, so first of all, tonight was a very, very special treat for me, sharing the stage professionally with my sister. I thank Dragos immensely for the invitation, and I thank you all for attending. Yes, the topic of today's talk is AI-based transformation, but I will slightly twist around and talk about change. And the reason, well, the reason is my sister. So I'll start sharing my screen just a second. Yes, so a few months back, I published this article on LinkedIn, and I was comparing Ioana's situation with mine, being a career woman in a field that is largely dominated by men, I would say. A woman in AI, a woman in science and technology and finance and in leadership, you name it. Some 30 years back, when we were both still in Romania, I was studying at the university in mathematics, and roughly 50% of the students were female, and so was a large proportion of the university staff. So I guess, communist dictatorship did one thing right. They promoted gender equality in the professional world. I mean, at home, my dad and my husband would never, my dad and my grandfather would never do the dishes. I mean, a dictatorship can do so much, but they wouldn't change those habits. But professionally, yes, it never even occurred to me that a woman, I mean, there were fields that were too technical for women, so it was not something that I had thought of. At the same time, though, also in the same epoch, handicapped people were not given the same right to education. So blind people, such as my sister, were by law not allowed to go to university. There were a special curriculum that would teach them how to assemble cardboard boxes or become a masseuse so that they can be a productive member of the society. It's quite unimaginable for us today. Then we immigrated to Canada, and here many things were so much better. And so much more advanced, but certain things such as, this underrepresentation of women in certain technology domains was maybe less so. So just like Ioana said at some point, as we pursued our careers, we never lacked to identify ourselves with this bias, maybe that this handicap that we might or might not have. It's just like I wasn't necessarily calling myself a woman in AI. I would call myself an AI scientist. She wasn't calling herself a blind guitarist. She would call herself a musician who just happens to be blind. But there came this point of realization when we when he had to acknowledge that this bias does exist, and it maybe didn't exist to a certain degree for us, but it did. It was to some degree an obstacle, and to another degree also an advantage. So, just like a room goes hush when my sister goes on a stage with her can or with her guide dog, and she has everybody's undivided attention. There are also a bunch of positive discrimination events, women in science, women in this. So there are advantages and disadvantages, but most of all, it's important for us to be, identify ourselves with our intrinsic value and not with what differentiates us from the majority. So, long introduction to tell you that the original subject of today's talk was going to be AI transformation in finance, challenges and opportunities. So I'm twisting this around to talk about change in general, however something can go from new to normal, from a minority to normality. And I'm using the AI transformation as an example. All right. What is AI? So if you look it up in the dictionary, it says that it's the theory and development of computer systems that are capable of performing tasks traditionally requiring human intelligence. So already there in the definition, the dictionary definition, you see that it's something that it's quite relative and subjective, because what we perceive as being normal or being traditionally requiring human intelligence changes with time, right? So AI was actually introduced back in the 1950s, and it was very much based on logical reasoning, on symbolic logical inference, rule-based problem solving, and back then people were incredibly enthusiastic about this. They thought that within the next 10 years we would reach a point where you could converse with the computer and you wouldn't notice the difference. Very quickly, so the limitations of that technology became visible, and we entered what was called, this first AI winter, disillusions. There was a second boom of AI somewhere around the 80s around expert systems, when now intelligence was achieved by smart knowledge representation, expert system that would be, tools and technology would help diagnose problems, tech support, medical diagnosis, and so on. Soon, though, that also hit its boundaries, and it became obvious that it doesn't scale so easily. So we entered what we call the second AI winter, and that lasted quite a long time. And meanwhile, that was from the 90s, I would say, between 1990 and 2010 or so, there was actually the silent rise of data-driven AI or machine learning, statistical methods for this or that, for machine translations, for speech recognition, and others. And we wouldn't even, so that's the time when I started doing AI. And we weren't even considering ourselves, AI scientists. We were calling ourselves, machine learning specialists. And then around the 2010, there was this AI frenzy hit. That's when the data-driven techniques that had been developed over the past 10, 20 years took a turn for a huge step, made a huge step forward with some innovations in technology for deep learning, and the technological capabilities increased so much that we could handle huge amount of data and much more efficiently. So we're now in this third AI frenzy period, and already we start seeing some of these limitations. So what I'm saying here is that what AI is and our perception of what it should and shouldn't be and could and couldn't do changes over time. And another interesting piece of information that I wanted to give you is that those mathematical models that are the basis of deep learning today, the neural nets we call them, they had actually been developed in the 1940s or 50s. And it was back then only a purely theoretical theoretical model. There were no practical application whatsoever for this. So, you know, they are now the basis of this ubiquitous rise of AI. Some opportunities, I'm going to go through this very quickly. So when in my daily job, I'm identifying in the bank where AI could be used, and it's wherever decisions or prediction needs to be made, personalization, communication, marketing, efficiencies, augmenting the value of the human intervention with smarter tools. But I won't talk about this too much. Challenges. There are lots of, you know, concrete prerequisites from a technological point of view in terms of data. You can't do machine learning without data-driven statistical methods, without having the data, the infrastructure, computational data management infrastructure, governance of data, the expertise that you need to get an AI-based product from ground up. But very, very importantly, and something that is not maybe talked so much about, is the change management, and the perceived threat of AI within the organization, within the society. I do at least half of my time is communication, is teaching others what AI can do and cannot do, and changing the mindset around the data use, you know, and how we can leverage data safely and effectively. Then there are legal, ethical, and cultural considerations. So the remainder of my talk will be on those change management and societal challenges around the adoption of AI. There's this funny moment when I got into one of my first exec meetings at the bank when some 2 years ago, and they told me that they would like to start using cameras in customer meetings and have the software analyze facial expressions to tell them whether the customer is happy or not with what's going on there. So, and I told them, that's not practical. Human facial expression perception is still much, much better than that of a computer system. So I have to constantly manage expectations. I need to still have them reach for the stars, but keep them grounded on what's reasonable and what's realistic. And I asked my son to do this drawing. Yuan, I can describe this drawing for you of a girl who reaches for her stars. Her head is in the clouds somewhere, but she has really, really solid boots that sit on the ground. So, you know, they sometimes ask me, is the singularity near? The singularity being that moment when we think that artificial intelligence could reach and then surpass human intelligence. And there are those optimists who think that this would be reached somewhere in the around 2000 something. But then there are the, you know, I don't want to call them skeptics, but maybe the practitioners, those who have white hair because of all the problems that AI has caused them and making those systems work properly, who better understand the limitations of what AI can and cannot do. So it's really, really good at predicting, making simple predictions, decisions, black or white, fraud, no fraud, credit, no credit, risk, no risk. They're much less good at doing any kind of complex learning, linguistic, sequential, slow, conscious decision-making processes, or reasoning, or planning, or identifying causality. Also very, very strong at perception, classifying images, and obviously, right? So so all this to say that the current state of the technology has some enormous strengths, but also some clear limitations. Let's talk a little bit about this, the threat that AI sometimes is perceived to be. First of all, in the job market, when we go, is AI going to replace a large number of jobs? What is going to happen with all this job? And how is actually AI different from past technological revolutions, right? when electricity came along, it did change the job market quite considerably, didn't it? So there is one element that is different from past events, which is the speed of change. So we need to be cognizant of it when we think of the societal impact of AI. Privacy and fraud obviously are a big consideration whenever AI implementations are to be considered. And the crux of the problem lies both in the protection of the data itself, whether or not you use it for AI, but also in the way you apply your data, the AI applications that you do with them. There are lots of legal, ethical considerations to be taken into account when you apply, when you do AI solutions. Another thing which I find kind of funny sometimes is the social acceptability of errors. So when a human does an error, sometimes it's endearing, it's funny, it's, you know, it's normal. When a computer system does an error, it becomes, you know, news headline. So sometimes I wonder whether we should treat them both the same or not. But it is expected for automatic system to perform better. On the ethics and the governance of AI, this is a huge subject. I could spend hours talking about just by this. Whenever we do an AI model, we need to make sure that it doesn't discriminate, so that it's not biased, that it is explainable. Even by law, sometimes in banking, we are required to be able to explain why somebody got, you know, approved for credit and somebody did not. So those big black box AI models that make a decision based on millions of data samples, if they cannot reveal the logic behind their decision, we cannot apply them to certain areas. So this is a really big thing. Another series of considerations is, you know, around the intrusion of technology in our daily life. There was this cool article written by Nicholas Carr in The Atlantic in 2008. It was called "Is Google Making Us Stupid?" And I must admit that sometimes when I use, you know, Google Navigate or Google Maps and I get from a point A to point B without really realizing what I'm doing, I don't feel particularly intelligent, right? But this question, you know, about data that overwhelms people, you know, in the area of fake news and this overabundance of information sources where you don't necessarily know how reliable they are. This question was also being asked by this researcher from Switzerland, Konrad Gessner, and he was saying that this modern world overwhelms people with data and that this overabundance is both confusing and harmful to the mind. Now, actually, Konrad Gessner wrote this quote in 1565, and he was worrying then about printing, right? Let's take another example. The introduction of AI or technologies in education. Well, when my kids went to college, they were it was mandatory for them to have a laptop, and I was wondering whether it's, you know, an overkill, if it's going to distract them from what's really essential. And there was again another thinker that was worried about the children's overuse of technology would create forgetfulness in their learners' souls because they would not use their memories. And now this thinker happens to be Plato, who was paraphrasing Socrates, and he was then worrying about writing. So what am I trying to say here is that, you know, AI is one of those new technologies that comes along and changes things. But I am this incredible optimist into the human's capability to understand the value of it, integrate it, set the boundaries right for it, just like we did for, you know, cars. We invented roads and traffic rules and everything, but we did integrate in our daily life. So I'm a big optimist, and I believe in change and our capacity to handle it. I'd like to maybe conclude on this quote written by Douglas Adams. Geek alert, I'm a geek. Douglas Adam is an author of this famous, funny Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy book. And he wrote this quote saying that everything that exists before you were born, is just normal, the way things should be. Everything that is invented from your birth until you're about 30 is cool and neat and innovative. And everything invented after you're 30 is against the natural order of things and the beginning of the end of the civilization as we know it. So how does this tie back to Ioana's presentation and to me and to my article comparing women in science and in technology and others, and talking about how change can be integrated, right? How change can be generated and how it's just the normal order of things. I'm finishing our talk with two images from Kathleen Schweitzer. She was this woman who ran ran the Boston Marathon back in 1967, I believe. She was the first woman to officially register for the marathon. Back then, it was not allowed for men to run marathons. It was believed that they're not capable of this, that it would somehow harm their reproductive systems to run such long distances. And she did the race. And what you see in this photo is the organizer of the race, the manager of the race, actually trying to physically, run after her and stop her from running, grabbing her. And her boyfriend and her coach were kind of like stopping this guy from grabbing her sweater. So Catherine ran the Boston Marathon 50 years later. She was then 70 years old. She ran it again, wearing the same number. And 50 years later, about 57% of athletes participating in long distance events are female. So I think there's hope, and there is, I'm the eternal optimist, believing that we are able to enable change by being outspoken, being out there, being successful. So thank you for allowing us to do so. That's it.
Thank you very much, Simona, for the nice presentation. The same, if you want to ask a question, either send a message in the chat or raise your hand, and I'll call your name, so then you can unmute yourself. Monica has another question, so feel free to unmute yourself.
Hi, Kaz.
Hi, Simona. Hi, Kaz. So what a privilege today to hear both of you speaking in the same time. Yeah. It's quite surreal for me. And I remember the time about a few years ago when I asked my own sister, and I was like, what does Simona do? And she couldn't really explain it to me. So I had to Google you. So yeah, I could say sometimes Google makes you stupider, but in that instance particularly, it gave way to a video where you were explaining to your kids what you were doing in AI, and you were kind of like RD2D, and I found that so nice and light. But unfortunately, with the present context, things are not as light. I find that it's so important what you said, that there is this, I think, even more mounting fear of AI due to the present context because of the pandemic, people losing jobs, fearing that AI would overrun the job market. And the way I see it is, it's the first time that I actually visually and heard the actual definition of AI in your speech. So for me, it's very interesting because I think that a lot of the times labeling things, like in psychology or behavior sociology, we see that the definition per se is part of the problem.
Mhm.
So when we see that AI is replacing things that humans can do, uh, I see that as a problem. So how would you redefine the definition so it wouldn't be as threatening, or it would actually be in a more of a positive bias? I know it's a it's a big one to
No,
redefine something, but I'm sure that you've thought about this.
well, it's part of my daily job, so I don't need to redefine it. So as you read the definition, um, actually, I don't think we need to be preoccupied by the definition of it. I think we just need to create more understanding of when you use AI on a daily basis and that it actually is useful for you. And at some point, you know, you get to trust it. For example, you know, Google search. Do I need to tell you what kind of algorithms are behind that and that it's using data and it's using machine learning to be relevant to you? No, you just use it because it's, you know, it's practical. And then you, of course, you become aware of data privacy issues and data collection, which need to be addressed in parallel. But it's irrelevant what technology is used under the hood for you, right? Just like Ioana was mentioning, AI is becoming a tool, and the more you get used to it and the more you get to use its application in certain fields, you know, the less threatened you feel by it. We name it, we understand it, we communicate what it does, and it will just become normal.
Okay, so I see. So you're saying that the increased use of it doesn't necessarily, it will make people feel more comfortable in time, even though there is not as much transparency because people maybe can't understand it as much.
There's education that is done around what AI is, and once you understand it and name it, and you understand where you're already using it, it just, you know, it becomes part of your daily life. Yes, with usage and with education, things change.
Thank you, Simona.
Thank you.
We have another question request from Susa May. If you want to unmute yourself.
Sure. Hi, Simona. It's Susan this side. Can you hear me?
Yes, I hear you very well. Hi.
Hi. So yeah, I appreciate that the way you had explained the whole AI thing and the concept, the threats and challenges. Sometimes I believe that it's a kind of an episode from Black Mirror. It's on Netflix. So that's also prefigured to AI. So yeah. Jokes apart. So what my question is that since what do you recommend for someone who wants to get into the field of AI, who is good in statistics, who is good in maths, but like say, for example, he or she is lacking the domain knowledge. Like say, for example, like you said about banking, right?
Mm-hmm.
So in banking, I believe there are a lot of AI stuff which goes on with anti-money laundering, terror funding, and all the stuff. So if someone wants to start the AI role, so apart from the technical skills and the statistical skills, how do you, how does one gather the domain skills? Because normally, if you just see through the job descriptions and whatever stuff it says that you need to have a banking experience, you need to have a banking experience, or you need to have a banking domain knowledge. So what's your take on this?
Well, I started 2 years ago at the bank, and I didn't have banking experience. I had business, I had AI, I had product, and I had, you know, engineering experience. I had an experience on strategy and how seeing things strategically in a generic way, and I learned the domain as I went. If you develop good generic data science, programming, machine learning skills, these can be applied in pretty much any domain, especially if you enter, you know, at the junior level. You will have people who will be there helping you defining the problem that you need to solve for you. So you will acquire the domain knowledge as you go. Another way is to do internships.
Okay.
We hire all big institutions have quite generous intern programs where you can get started within a team and learn about the business. If you want to start, obviously, if you want to start your own company or whatever, then you need to understand the problem you're solving first. Actually, then it's the opposite. You need to understand the problem first, and you apply your techniques to that problem.
Okay. So, Samhita, you are saying that it's not a make or break thing. One can learn eventually in the job itself.
Yep.
Okay. Understand. Problem. Thanks. Thanks, Simona.
Sure. Pleasure.
So, yeah.
I can also have another suggestion. Next week, AI Geeks is starting a 1-month study group in AI in medicine. So if you want to join us, we'll have a nice presentation, and then for 1 month, we'll all go through a course by deeplearning.ai, Andrew Ng's company. So if you want, you can join us and learn something new. We have another question from Alex. If you can unmute yourself.
Yeah, hi. Well,
hi.
First of all, I'm super happy. I'm Simona's son, and I'm super happy to hear her talking about AI and stuff. Like Monica said, my mom used to tell me about what she did as a living, what her job was, and she described it as coding the brain for R2D2 and C3PO, and it was super interesting to me. It made me like kind of fall in love with machine learning. What I want to ask is, especially with ethical concerns and all that stuff, when you're coding something that's data driven, when you're coding something that's basically you plug in machine learning into your program and you try to find an optimal solution for a certain problem, do you necessarily know how the program itself works? And if you don't, how do you make sure that you're not being unethical in, let's say, the way you pick participants for a study or other different ways? I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Perfect. Yeah, great question. Hi, kiddo. So glad you could join. Yeah, Alex is my son. Yeah, so this is a great mom-son moment. All right. How do you ensure that your data-driven machine learning model is ethical? There are algorithms that allow you to explain how a decision of that model had been taken. They're called like open box, algorithms that are explainable. Others, where your model tweaks a bunch of internal parameters on its own as it sees more and more and more examples, they turn to this big, humongous black box, and you cannot correlate any of your input variables to a decision. So you cannot tell anybody why that algorithm told you, advised against giving credit or not, or advised that this person could have credit and this other one didn't. So how do you make sure that your algorithms are not biased? It's by consciously designing predefined data sets where you consciously balance your training samples to represent all sorts of input parameters and people in an equal fashion. And you also design test sets that you test your models with to make sure that the outcome of the model, doesn't treat, let's say, women differently than men, right? So, and these are very very severe and very important guidelines that any public institutions such as a bank need to implement and are legally forced to do, and they are like, it's adamant that they're implemented. Do all companies who train AI models go into big lengths to put this in place? Not necessarily. So this is why we need to be vigilant, and we need to, you know, make sure that there are laws that are there and that it can, you know, enforce these good practices.
All right, thanks, Mom.
This turned out to be a family business here. So
The Romanian are taking over.
So let's invite Ron. If you can unmute yourself.
Okay, Simona, I have two, I don't know, two very different views on a lighter note, because right now we're not really going into anything too scientific. I have two very different views on AI. One being that AI handles the mundane tasks, leaving me free to use my brain for something more important, or that requires more human, more the human touch. But then again, at the same time, I see AI being a means to possibly make my brain a little bit lazy by the fact that I can very easily forget to do things because I have all kinds of machines that can remind me. So I'd like to know what your views are on that. Which side of the fence? Of course, nothing is black and white, but which side of the fence do you tend to be on?
So I am a strong advocate of the fact that this technology is there to help, you know, help us do certain tasks easier, but it doesn't turn us into stupid being. It just frees us up to do more. Just like Socrates was worried about, you know, introducing writing in school because they say people don't use their memories anymore. Let them, they can't take notes. Well, actually, it helps tremendously. Yes, you do take notes, and yes, you might not remember those phone numbers by heart, but you definitely learn other things, right? So I don't feel threatened by it for a bit. Yes, I don't know my numbers by heart, but I learn other things.
Okay, thanks. I just wanted to know which side of the fence. So I guess you're on my number one side, the side that frees your brain to do something even more important. That's more human. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's an it's an augmentation tool, right? That enables us to do more and other things.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Ron. We have another question from Ioana. So Ioana, if you could unmute yourself and ask the question.
Yes. Hi. So I have a question. What fascinates me, and I'm very much aware more than others probably about the beneficial aspects of things, but also the dark side of the coin. How do we handle our risk of being manipulated? For example, AI or data that knows how to anticipate our habits, and this can be very easily used to make us addicted to certain behaviors, to hook us into things. I read a nice quote somewhere that this whole social media technology is built on the carcasses of our attention span. And I was curious, what do you, like, of course, any new technology has risks and will make other skills of ours less relevant, but what can we do to try to be aware of how we're being manipulated, or try to avoid being manipulated as much, or all this whole manipulative aspect of intelligent promptings and notifications and suggest this, so you, I don't know. I'm a little annoyed with how smart technology gets to know us so well that it pushes our unconscious buttons.
So I will make a parallel with commercials. When they started a while back, and subliminal commercials sometimes, and, you know, all marketing mechanisms to get you to buy one product over the other. What I'm saying is that manipulation, the attempt to manipulate us into doing certain things that has been always there and will always be. And whether it's done, and it can become more and more increasingly subtle. And the only, but as were commercials back then and subliminal messages in the early days, they were also very revolutionary and very subtle. So what I'm saying is that there is no foolproofing against these attempts to manipulate consumers into doing what corporations want them to do. And the best defense, and the only defense actually, is education. We need to educate ourselves. So there are a bunch of little books that, you know, promote self-defense based on critical thinking and learning and reading and education in school. And yeah, I guess that's the only real defense against these manipulation attempts. And the other ones, of course, there are a bunch of flaws that can be done, such as that, for example, you don't put commercials for toys into for kids, because, you know, kids can be manipulated. So laws were put in place to put boundaries around certain practices, and we will have boundaries around AI.
And do you think that the laws need to catch up with how fast technology changes? Because I mean,
there's always a catch up. There's always to catch up, but it's always happening. Like it's the history of society, right? Of human society.
Right. Thanks.
Sure.
We have another question from Joseph. If you want to unmute yourself and ask the question.
Hello, Simona. I have a general question. This is in terms of learning. What are your thoughts on using machine learning to help human learning?
Education is one of the biggest areas of application of AI. There are some incredibly successful companies out there that build programs that, you know, recommend you do tests with, help you study. So and they optimize your performance during exams, and they recommend which subjects you should study, and they do this in a personalized manner. They take into account this, they put you through tests, and they measure your facial expressions, the time it took you to respond, to measure your level of uncertainty. So that's one area of application, and there are many others. Yes, definitely. So you can learn languages using AI-driven tools. You can help. And I have a cool friend of mine who built an app who teaches kids how to read, and he made a game with it. So the kids read it out. There's a speech recognition engine that translates it and says whether or not it was close to what the word was supposed to be. And anyways, so definitely huge area of applications.
Thank you.
Alex, next.
Sorry about that. I was just unmuting. Yeah, so I mean, it's a bit of a longer question, so I've written it down just in case for afterwards. But it's actually building on that last comment about sort of behavioral design, because that's obviously something that I'm very interested in.
Mm-hmm.
And one debate I've seen back and forth, often there's an age difference between younger people not being concerned about privacy of their data. They're willing to share anything. It's just kind of an accepted norm in all the tools we use. Versus, say, a government person might say, well, that's a good reason not to trust someone younger without that sort of cynicism and experience to design our policy laws. Mm-hmm. And but from my perspective, like I used to run studies, and it was just so easy. Like you'd have a feature, the opt-in, where everyone was just giving your data, and then as soon as the scandal happened and GDPR, now suddenly it's almost like a knee-jerk reaction where if I see, even though I want the data, if I see a form pop up saying, will you give us data, I just automatically say no. So I'm kind of wondering about that tension, about if it's going to make it harder to do sort of positive, beneficial research to help avoid the more creepy or invasive stuff.
Yeah, creepiness factor is very, very worrisome, and sometimes you can do completely legal and legitimate applications, but the creepiness factor kicks in and people get scared by it. I'll give you an example. You know, if imagine you have an app that tracks your location and it either helps you navigate, or you know, it tells you, well, at this corner of the street there is actually, you're visiting a new town and there's this great bagel shop if you want to try it out, and then it gives you recommendations as to, depending on the location you are, of things you could try out. I've worked on a similar things for Toyota in my previous career. Now, the same information that was used to give me recommendations of things to look at could be used to prompt me, whether how I like the restaurant that I just went into, you know, this Google notification, you've just been at this cafe, how good was it? And that I might feel intrusive. There's a lot to be said about things that are these kind of services that can be perceived, why they're intrusive versus not. Do I opt in? Do I opt out? And I think that we should go on the safe side for now. There is resistance, and we have to acknowledge this fear and this resistance and live with it, and make sure that laws are in place that protect the user properly. And the confidence will come as we develop applications that they really find useful, and then when they gain confidence that their data is protected. So, you know, we have to deal with those precautions.
Rebuilding a trust, that makes sense.
Okay, I think there are no more questions. Thank you very much, Simona, for the nice presentation, and thank you also, Ioana.